It was not an easy drive. So if we go, we've got a nice intimate group, so as I go through my comments, if you have a question about something I say, raise your hand, and when I'm finished, we'll spend whatever time you'd like talking just generally. So the Commission on Innovation and Excellence, just to get everybody on the same page, some of you probably know quite a bit about it, others may know less. So it was created as a bipartisan effort in the 2016 legislative session. A bill passed by the General Assembly, signed by Governor Hogan, appointing a 25-member commission to basically do two things. Make recommendations so that Maryland schools would perform at the level of the best performing school systems, not just in the U.S., but in the world, okay? And secondly, to develop the cost estimates and the funding formulas that would support the recommendations of the Commission. Now, I commend our leaders for that rather audacious charge, because I think we all know in this day and age that if we're going to give our children a chance to be successful and keep our economy in Maryland strong, we've got to have education systems. I mean, success in life and in business today is so dependent upon education. I mean, we've got to be competitive with the best if we want to continue the fruits of the world we live in, benefits of the world we live in today. So now the commission itself was very broadly based. It represented essentially every organization that represents vested interest groups in education. They're on the commission. The PTA had represented them. The collective bargaining units had represented them. The business community had represented them. Obviously, the State Board of Education, the superintendents, the county commissioners, on and on and on. Higher education, everybody represented, all these groups represented on the commission, which of course made it somewhat of a challenge because all these people know about education and all have ideas about how to fix the problem. The only issue is there are 25 different solutions, and so getting people to come together around a meaningful set of recommendations was not an easy task.
Closer
Okay.
microphone?
Sure. Could you all have it? Is this better?
You have to bring it up a little closer.
Okay. I don't think maybe it's not even on.
Oh, here.
Were you all having trouble hearing me?
No.
I don't actually think I need it, unless you need it for the...
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. Okay, so that was our charge, and we all, the 25, most of us on the commission, most of the 25, came to our work thinking, you know, Maryland schools are really good. We've got a few isolated problems here probably, but this is going to be not such a difficult assignment. But so we had to dig in. If we're going to be as good as the best, we had to really dig down and see where are we now. And we found some very disturbing facts. We do have good schools, and we certainly have good schools here in Howard County. We have some excellent teachers, and we have excellent teachers in Howard County. The issue is that when you look at the state, and probably even in parts of Howard County, we don't have enough of them. And let me give you some facts that the commission found very disturbing. There is an exam that is mandated by the federal government called the NAEP exam. Some of you may know the NAEP exam. But it's called the National Assessment of Education Progress. And it's given to 4th and 8th graders in reading and math. It's the same exam given in every state in the union. So it's a fair benchmark of how well our kids are doing. And the sad fact is that when you look at the NAEP exam in reading and math, 4th and 8th grade, we rank in the lower 20s. In some of those tests in math, I think it's even 32nd. And that's 32nd against the other 50 states. So that says that maybe our schools aren't as good as we thought they were. We also have terrible funding equity issues. We are a regressive state when it comes to funding education, in the sense that we spend more money on kids living in affluent communities than we do on kids living in low-income communities. Just as an example of that, and if you look at schools that have no low-income students on the one hand versus at least 30% free and reduced lunch on the other, Massachusetts spends $3,000 more on the latter than the former. New Jersey does. Massachusetts spends $1,500 more. Maryland spends $1,200 less. And so there is a significant funding issue. We also have a very troubling teacher shortage in our state of keeping and retaining high-quality teachers. So the State Department of Education put out a report in 2015 that said that new teachers, 47% of new teachers leave the profession after 2 years. Can you believe that? How do you build high-quality instruction in our schools with that kind of turnover? Teaching is no longer a career, a professional career. It's a revolving door. And so this is a huge problem for our state. So we, as a commission, this was really showering down a lot of information that caught us by surprise. But the bottom line, and this is the thing that ought to keep all of us up at night, the bottom line is that we have too many students who are not educated at a level that they can have a chance for success in life. Now, every state, just like with NAEP, every state has to do NAEP. Every state has to have a college and career readiness standard. And each state can have its own college and career readiness standards, but you have to have them. Now, sadly, Maryland has chosen a particularly low college and career readiness standard. It is that students can read at the 10th grade level, and they can pass an Algebra 1 exam. So this past June, fewer than 40% of our high school graduates met that standard. Now I want to repeat that. Listen to this, think about this. Fewer than 40% of high school graduates in Maryland this past June could read at the 10th grade level and pass an Algebra 1 exam. So that tells you that our education problems are not localized. They exist in every jurisdiction in the state now. They exist to different degrees. Probably the Howard County students had a lot higher percent college and career ready. But think about our state. What kind of state are we going to have? What are these kids going to do? How are they going to get a good job? How are they going to have a chance at a good life? What kind of economy are we going to have in Maryland with this as the product of our high school? So here we came into this commission with this audacious charge. We want to be as good as the best. And we find out that, and one other thing, our performance on NAEP, where we were back very much in the middle of the pack, that would be bad enough if the United States was this shining city on the hill in education. We just have to move up. We're in the top here already. We just have to move up in that pecking order. But that's not the case. There is a very respected international exam called the PISA exam. It's managed by an organization maybe some of you have heard of the OECD. the Organization Economic, OEC, whatever. Anyway, it's an organization that collects data for the major economies of the world. And they collect all sorts of data about many different things. They manage this PISA exam to see how good schools are comparatively among the best economies. And so they test 15-year-olds in reading, math, and science. And it turns out that the U.S. by this test ranks somewhere like in the 28th, 29th, 30th. So the conclusion that the commission faced is that we want to be the best, but right now we are very mediocre in a country that is very mediocre internationally. So that is a huge lift, a huge lift. So how are we going to come up with recommendations to change this situation? And we were very blessed to have identify a really highly regarded think tank, not-for-profit think tank in Washington, D.C. called the National Center for Education and the Economy. Just write down NCEE, and if you Google it, you'll get lots of information about them. Well, guess what they've done? They've spent the last 20 years studying the elements of high-performing school systems around the world. And out of this extensive research, they have determined the building blocks of high-performing systems. And what's amazing is that the high performers, even though they exist in different parts of the world, and they have different governmental structures, they have different ethnicities, etc., etc. It is amazing how faithful they are to these building blocks. So what the commission did then, with the help of NCEE and the staff at Department of Legislative Services, we did an intensive gap analysis between what we do in Maryland and what these high performers do. And so our report is basically filling those gaps. Our report has been done with intensive care and scrutiny, and is research-based, and we came up through this gap analysis with basically 5 major policy recommendations. And I just will highlight them. We can get into them in more detail during the question and answer period. So the first policy recommendation is, if we're going to be among the best, we have to invest much more in early childhood education. That is absolutely critical. Too many kids are coming to kindergarten not ready to learn. So the commission has recommended that we provide access to full-day, high-quality preschool for all 4-year-olds. It would be free for low-income 4-year-olds, and full-day access to high-quality preschool for all low-income 3-year-olds. But we even learned that that in itself is not enough. We have to worry about 0 to 3. So much happens between 0 and 3. So much of that very early child development, what it does with the brain and the capacity to learn. So there are some phenomenal resources in the state called family service centers. And what they do is they work with young mothers in low-income districts, both pre- and postnatal, on nutrition, child rearing, and all of these things, so that children can get off to a good start. So these are fabulous resources, but we don't have enough of them. And so the commission has recommended that we double the number of these family resource centers. Also expand the number of Judy centers. Maybe some of you have heard about Judy centers. So that's the recommendation on early childhood. The second recommendation is, and this is going to be a real challenge because it's a tremendous cultural change for our country, not just Maryland. We have got to elevate teaching to a high status profession. There's just no other way that we're going to get to where we want to be. There is no high performing school system in the world where teachers aren't considered. Teaching isn't considered as a high status profession. Teachers are professionals, treated like other professionals, and compensated appropriately. So what we've recommended is that we have to improve, strengthen the quality of our teacher preparation programs. We have to elevate teachers' certification standards, and then we're going to build a career ladder, merit-based career ladder, so that teachers can stay in teaching, work as professionals, and earn an appropriate salary. And what we've recommended is that we benchmark teachers' salaries against other professions requiring the same amount of education. CPAs, nurses, architects. That's how we should benchmark teachers' salaries so that we can attract more of the best and brightest into teaching and keep them there. The third recommendation is that we, of course, if we want to be as good as the best, we've got to be sure our curriculum is benchmarked in terms of rigor and continuity with the best performing system. So that's one piece of the recommendations. But what we are saying is we need to raise the college and career ready standard. Who wants 10th grade and Algebra 1? Raise the college and career ready standard and targets kids to get to that standard by the end of the 10th grade. Then in the 11th and 12th grade, there would be pathways. You could do advanced placement, international baccalaureate. You could do early college. Bring in Howard Community College. And these kids could earn a 2-year degree maybe before they finish high school, or at least have a running start on college credits. The third, and this is a real innovation, we need a rigorous career and technical education pathway. What we've done here is we've said we've got to bring in the private sector. We've got to bring in the trades. Let them set the standards so that if a kid follows this pathway, when they finish, they'll have an industry certified credential and step into a high-paying job. And they're out there. There are lots of high-paying jobs if kids have the right skills. And we're not giving them the right skills at this moment. So this really rigorous career and technical education pathway is an important part of our recommendations. The fourth policy recommendation is that we have to address the funding equity issues. In particular, for schools that are serving high concentrations of poverty, we want them all to be so-called community schools. Now, a community school is a school that has extra services brought into the school. There's extra counseling services. There's a coordinator that has links to all the services that can help the kids and their families in that school. There would be extra tutoring in the school. There'd be after-school academic programs, summer programming, in significantly increasing the availability of resources to the very kids that need it most. And then the fifth policy recommendation is that we have to have a really, really rigorous accountability system. I think a lot of people say, well, these four policy areas make a lot of sense. They certainly do to me. I hope they do to you. But how do we know if we invest more money that we're going to get the results that we have said? So what the Commission has done is tied funding, not in a punitive way, in a supportive way, to successful implementation of the recommendations, and then evidence that the kind of progress we want to see is being made. And when that hasn't happened, expert teams would be sent into the school before additional funds flow in order to get things right, get the implementation right, make the changes necessary so that we're seeing the progress we want to see with our kids. So those are the 5 policy areas. And then the commission did significant work to determine what's the cost of all of this. And this has gotten a lot of attention, as you've probably seen in the paper. And it doesn't come cheap. It doesn't come cheap. We have to acknowledge that. We have a 10-year implementation plan. That's the proposal. And what the cost would be, the cost would rise over what we're currently projecting to spend on education by $3.8 billion, divided between the state and the local jurisdictions at the end of the 10th year. That's about a 2.5% increase each year for 10 years over what we had planned to spend. So where's everything now? Well, the commission was asked to continue its work after we said, oh, incidentally, so we wrapped all this up back in January, gave it to the General Assembly, and a bill was put forth called the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, adopting the policy framework we said, finding the state share of the funding, identifying the state share of the funding for the next 3 years, not the full 10 years, but the next 3 years, to get the implementation started, and ask the commission to continue working and give a formula that divides the cost jurisdiction by jurisdiction of the division over the $3.8 billion. So a committee has been working to do just that. It just finished its work. That has gone to the full commission. The full commission will now work over October and November, put its final stamp of approval on its recommendation. That will go to the General Assembly, and it will be in the hands of the General Assembly and the governor to dispense with the report. I will say that one of the high points of my professional career, incidentally, as you can tell by my white hair, I've been this is closer to the end of my professional career than the beginning, for sure. But I've been president of 2 major universities, chancellor of a university system, math faculty professor for many, many years. And in my entire professional life, this is the hardest thing I've ever done, working on this commission. But, and I do this as a volunteer, this is the most important thing I've ever done. And, you know, as I think about where we are in the state, I think we are in a struggle, really, in Maryland. A struggle over the soul of our state. What kind of state do we want to be? Do we want to be a state that invests in our children and the future of our state? Or do we want to be a state where it's every person for themselves? And if you've got assets and you're in good shape and you can send your kids to great schools, fine, that's other people's problem if they can't do that. Is that the kind of state we want to be? That's not the kind of state I want Maryland to be. I want Maryland to be a state that is concerned about the future of every child. Now people say, you know, this is a lot of money. But let me ask those people, what's it going to cost us if fewer than 40% of our high school graduates can't read at the 10th grade and pass an Algebra 1 exam? What's that going to cost us? And I also say, think about this. We upgrade the education of all of our children. They're going to earn more money. We're going to have more tax revenue. They're not going to be on Medicaid. Not nearly as many are going to go to prison. The prisons are predominantly populated by young people who never got a good high school education. We can change that. So if you step back and look at the overall ROI, this will pay for itself. So we just have to be willing to step up to the plate early in this process, get these policy recommendations implemented, and we will transform the future of the state for our children and for all of its citizens. So thank you for being such a patient audience. I love talking to you. Thank you.